There is a journey that every empath walks alone, a path that is often invisible to the outside world and rarely acknowledged by those who have never experienced it. It is not written about in most psychology textbooks, and it is rarely discussed in conventional therapy sessions, because the empath's experience is so deeply internal that it defies easy description. But if you are an empath watching this, you know exactly what I am talking about, because you have lived it. You feel things before they happen, sensing the shifts in energy before anyone else notices. You absorb emotions from rooms the moment you enter them, taking in the mood like a sponge soaking up water. And you have probably spent most of your life being told that you are too sensitive, too emotional, or that you need to toughen up and stop feeling so much. These words have likely been spoken to you by well-meaning friends, frustrated family members, or partners who could not understand why you reacted so deeply to things that barely registered with them. But what if I told you that your sensitivity is not a weakness, that the very qualities that have made you feel different, even broken at times, are actually the foundation of something powerful? What if the very thing that has made you feel different, even broken, is actually a psychological superpower that most people will never understand or possess, a gift that sets you apart from the majority of humanity? The research on highly sensitive persons, pioneered by Dr. Elaine Aron, reveals that approximately 1520% of the population has a nervous system that is fundamentally different from the rest. You process information more deeply than others, taking in more details and reflecting on them more thoroughly. You notice subtleties that others miss, the small shifts in tone, expression, and energy that reveal the truth beneath the surface. And when it comes to emotional information, you are essentially operating with high-definition perception in a world where most people are still using standard definition, seeing only what is obvious while you perceive the full spectrum. Today, we are exploring the exact moment an empath stops explaining and starts protecting, the pivotal turning point that transforms their entire relationship with themselves and the world. And by the end of this video, you will understand yourself in a completely new way, recognizing the patterns that have shaped your life and the potential that lies ahead. The exact moment an empath stops explaining and starts protecting is not always dramatic, not always accompanied by a grand declaration or a dramatic exit. It often arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, after yet another exhausting attempt to make someone understand. For years, the empath has been explaining themselves endlessly, believing that if they could just find the right words, the other person would finally see the truth. They have explained their intentions, their feelings, their boundaries, their pain, and their hopes over and over again, hoping that understanding would create change. They have spent countless hours trying to articulate what feels so obvious to them, believing that clarity would resolve the conflict. But something shifts in that moment, a recognition that changes everything. They realize that some people do not want to understand, that their explanations are not failing because the words are wrong, but because the other person is not interested in understanding. The empath suddenly understands that no amount of explanation can change someone who is committed to misunderstanding them. This is the moment of transformation, when explanation gives way to silence, and silence becomes protection. The empath stops pouring their energy into conversations that go nowhere, stops trying to convince people who have already made up their minds, and begins redirecting that energy toward themselves. This is not giving up. It is waking up. It is the recognition that their peace is more valuable than being understood by people who refuse to see them clearly. Silence is one of the most misunderstood and powerful tools in human psychology, a force that is often underestimated by those who have not learned to wield it. Research by Dr. Namke Kudenberg on conversational silence shows that strategic silence creates what psychologists call social gravity, a pull that draws people toward you because it creates uncertainty that demands resolution. When you stop explaining yourself, something profound happens in the psychological dynamic of any relationship. You shift from a position of seeking approval to a position of self-containment, from needing validation to being complete within yourself. This shift changes everything, transforming how others perceive you and how you perceive yourself. Studies by Fennis and Staple on persuasion dynamics show that individuals who appear self-contained and non-reactive are perceived as higher status and more credible than those who are constantly seeking approval. They are seen as having more power, more confidence, and more value, simply because they do not need to prove themselves. The mechanism behind this is what researchers call the scarcity principle, extensively documented by Cialdini in his work on influence. When explanation and justification are freely available, they are valued less, because they are abundant and easy to obtain. When they become rare, each word carries significantly more weight, because it is precious and hard to come by. Your silence becomes a form of psychological scarcity that increases your perceived value, making people pay more attention when you do speak. But strategic silence is not passive-aggressive withdrawal, not a way to punish others with silence. It is not the silent treatment, which is a form of emotional manipulation designed to control others through withholding. True silence is active and conscious, a deliberate choice to conserve your energy and protect your peace. Research by Gross on emotion regulation distinguishes between suppressive silence, which is repressive and harmful to your well-being, and reappraisal-based silence, which is strategic and empowering. Suppressive silence is when you swallow your feelings and pretend they do not exist, which leads to increased stress and emotional dysregulation. Reappraisal-based silence is when you consciously choose not to engage because you recognize that engagement would not be productive, that the other person is not open to understanding. This kind of silence is healthy because it is a choice rather than a reaction. In the context of relationships, when you stop chasing and explaining, you create what is called an absence vacuum, a void that cannot be ignored. Studies on loss aversion by Kahneman and Tversky show that people experience losses approximately twice as intensely as equivalent gains, meaning the pain of losing something is far greater than the pleasure of gaining it. Your absence becomes felt as a loss, which triggers a more profound psychological response than your presence ever could, because people are wired to notice what is missing more than what is present. The research by Bow on relational dissolution shows that the person who ends pursuit typically experiences an increase in perceived value, while the person who was pursued experiences uncertainty and anxiety. This dynamic shift is why walking away can be so powerful. It fundamentally restructures the power dynamic, placing the empath in a position of strength rather than weakness. The key insight is that your silence must be paired with genuine self-sufficiency, with a real commitment to your own well-being. If you are silently hoping for a reaction, you are not truly silent. You are just playing a different game of manipulation, one that is just as draining and ultimately just as unsatisfying. True silence means you have genuinely redirected your energy toward your own growth and well-being, that you are no longer invested in the outcome of the other person's response. The silence is a byproduct of your investment in yourself, not a tactic to provoke a response, because genuine self-care does not need an audience. This distinction matters because research on authentic versus inauthentic behavior shows that people can sense the difference even when they cannot articulate it, that their intuition picks up on the subtle cues that reveal your true motivation. Genuine self-containment has a different energetic quality than strategic withdrawal designed to elicit a reaction, a quality that is felt even if it cannot be named. When you are truly silent because you are truly focused on yourself, people feel the shift in your energy. They sense that you are no longer waiting for them, no longer hoping they will change, no longer needing their approval. This is when the dynamic shifts permanently, because the old patterns can no longer continue. The empath who has stopped explaining has stopped hoping that words will fix what only action can change. They have accepted that some people will never understand, and they have made peace with that acceptance. This acceptance is not resignation, not a giving up on life. It is a release, a letting go of the burden of being understood by everyone. It is the recognition that your peace is more important than their approval, and that you are allowed to protect that peace, even if it means being misunderstood. The exact moment an empath stops explaining and starts protecting is the moment they realize that they have been seeking permission to exist, seeking validation for their feelings, seeking approval for their boundaries, and they finally give themselves that permission, that validation, that approval. The research is clear. The exact moment an empath stops explaining and starts protecting is not just an interesting psychological concept, not just a theory to ponder. It is a real phenomenon that affects your daily life, your relationships, and your well-being, shaping every aspect of your existence. Understanding it gives you something powerful: choice. You can respond from awareness rather than react from programming, making conscious decisions rather than being driven by unconscious patterns. You can navigate relationships with understanding rather than confusion, seeing clearly what is happening rather than being lost in the emotions. The question is not whether these patterns exist in your life. They do, because they are part of the empath's experience. The question is what you will do with this knowledge, how you will use it to transform your life. Will you use it to understand yourself better, to make sense of the experiences that have confused you for so long? Will you use it to improve your relationships, to set boundaries that protect your well-being? Will you use it to protect yourself from those who would exploit your natural tendencies, to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation? Will you use it to develop strengths you did not know you had, to grow into the person you are meant to be? The path forward starts with honest self-assessment, a willingness to look at yourself clearly. Where do you see yourself in what we have discussed today? Are you still explaining yourself endlessly, hoping that understanding will finally come? Are you beginning to recognize that some people will never understand, no matter how clearly you explain? Or have you already started to protect your peace by choosing silence over explanation? What patterns resonate with your experience? What aspects of this journey feel familiar to you? What dynamics have you observed in your own relationships, the patterns that repeat themselves over and over? And more importantly, what is one thing you can do differently starting today? One small change that can set you on a new path. The research on behavior change shows that small, specific commitments are far more effective than grand resolutions, that incremental progress is more sustainable than dramatic transformation. Do not try to transform everything at once, because that approach often leads to burnout and disappointment. Pick one insight from this video, one idea that resonated with you, one pattern to watch for, one behavior that you recognize in yourself, one behavior to modify, one small change that can make a difference. And start there, because that is where real change begins. Remember, knowledge without action is just entertainment, a pleasant diversion that does not change anything. But knowledge with consistent action is genuine transformation, a shift that reshapes your life. You now have the knowledge, the understanding of the moment when explanation gives way to protection. The next move is entirely yours, because no one can make this journey for you. Choose wisely, because your choices will determine your future. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Human Behavior Intelligence, because this channel exists to help you understand yourself and others on a deeper level, to provide the insights you need to grow. Every video combines research-backed psychology with practical insights you can actually use, bridging the gap between theory and practice. The next video drops soon, and you will not want to miss it, because it will take you even deeper into the fascinating complexity of human behavior. Until then, stay observant, stay curious, and never stop learning about the fascinating complexity of human behavior, because the more you understand, the more you can grow. And remember, your sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a superpower, a gift that sets you apart. The journey from explaining to protecting is not easy, but it is worth it, because at the end of that journey is the person you were always meant to be. The person who feels deeply but is not controlled by their feelings. The person who understands others but does not lose themselves in that understanding. The person who knows when to speak and when to remain silent. The person who has finally found the balance that makes their sensitivity a strength rather than a burden. That person is waiting for you, and the path to becoming them is the moment you stop explaining and start protecting. Embrace that moment, because it leads to the most important destination of all, yourself.